Hi guys, welcome back to Santa's Space. Welcome back to Santa's Space. Today's video is going to be another News Beyond Headlines update where we discuss the situation of the Aboriginals or the Aborigines of Australia. They are, as well as other Indigenous groups, quite low on the social awareness radar. They're hardly seen as the face of Australia. They hardly really make the news, so we're going to talk about them today. So without rambling, let's just start. So the Aboriginals or the Aborigines of Australia are the indigenous population to Australia. They are the first time settlers to Australia before European colonisation. Studies suggest that they migrated to Australia between 50 and 70,000 years ago from Africa and Asia, and they've lived there ever since. They're thought to be one of the oldest populations outside the African continent, and they're quite varied in their ethnic groups. So they speak between 250 and 300 languages. They predominantly live in New South Wales, Queensland and some of the Northern Territories of Australia. They've had quite a traumatic history from colonisation in 1788, where with most colonisational circumstances, a lot of them are quite violent, with many Aboriginal populations being displaced from their native settlements. Okay, hell was the wrong way. So they then went through an era of what people call the stolen generation, where from 1800 to 1970, the Australian government had this kind of narrative to try and assimilate the Aboriginal population into normal Australian culture. And this occurred through forcibly removing children from Aboriginal families and forcing them into missionary camps, and for those who were of lighter complexion, making them be adopted by white Australian families, and there they'll have no contact with their families. Aboriginals were forced not to speak their native languages, and they were forced to kind of produce children with white Australian citizens, so that their offspring will be biracial and it'll kind of mix out the dark Aboriginal complexion and heritage. So what this has left is many Aboriginal families being displaced from their native communities. A lot of Aboriginal communities in general are quite engaged in heavy alcohol use. There is high violence in their communities also. A lot of them do not go through the education system, and also, the general life expectancy of an Aboriginal male is 10.5 years younger than a white Australian male, and for an Aboriginal woman, it's 9.5 years younger than a white Australian woman. So it kind of shows the standard of living between an Aboriginal citizen and a white citizen is quite stark. And due to these statistics, the Australian government and the United Nations have put together a lot of programs to try and kind of close the gap between Aboriginal populations and the white Australian population. For example, the Declaration of Rights for Indigenous People was adopted in 2009, which gives greater rights for Indigenous populations, including the Aboriginals of Australia, and it's quite important because they were involved in implementing these laws. They also had other laws in place, for example, a 3% reservation in jobs for Aboriginal populations in public jobs such as civil service, teaching, as well as increased welfare and education in a lot of their communities. However, some of the programs that the government has issued have caused conflicts amongst the Aboriginal populations, as they kind of find that some of the programs are quite intrusive on their culture. For example, their welfare payments, before it used to be in cash payments, but now it's via a basics card system, which they can only spend on certain goods. And from the government side, this is trying to kind of reduce the use of alcohol. However, it also does prohibit the purchase of other items, which is kind of limiting what the Aboriginal populations can spend income on. Also, reports show that the Australian government have been reclaiming some of the land that they initially gave to the Aboriginal communities as their native land. They've been reclaiming it back and putting certain restrictions on kind of time limits on when you can be outside and alcohol use. So this is causing, again, a kind of rising tension and hostility between the Aboriginal communities and the Australian government. But generally, the Australian government is doing a lot to try and bridge the gap between the living standards of Aboriginal populations and white Australians. So they are putting a lot of programs in place to try and bridge that gap. However, a lot is needed to be done to kind of relieve the trauma of the last 200 years for the Aboriginal populations, and to try and kind of assimilate everyone into a peaceful, cohesive, is that a word? Anyway, you know what I mean. Togetherness culture. So that's all I have for today's video. If you'd like to give it a thumbs up, if you want to share it, share it. Subscribe to the channel for more, and click the I always flop at the end of the videos. Why me? Click the notification bell if you'd like to see more for the next video. That's what it does. I don't even know what it does, but for the next video, click the notification bell, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.